Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, chances are you are standing right on the edge of, well, truly advanced proficiency in English. You've put in the hours, the grammar is, largely intuitive, and your vocabulary is pretty rich. You're at that solid C1 level.
Right, the level of competence and complexity.
Yeah.
And yet we know exactly why you requested this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's that persistent, frustrating gap, the plateau.
Exactly.
It's that moment when you're watching, I don't know, a fast, unscripted news program, or you're in a high-stakes meeting.
Or even just a local podcast.
Exactly. And suddenly the conversation just shifts into high gear. The words are there. You feel like the meaning is mostly there, but the rhythm just accelerates.
And you get lost. You feel yourself lagging, you miss the punchlines, the crucial caveats, or you just can't track that subtle political debate.
That is the problem.
That is the problem we are tackling today. The barrier between C1 and C2, it isn't really a knowledge barrier anymore, is it? Yeah. It's more cognitive and cultural.
It's totally cognitive. It's not about understanding English, it's about operationalizing it. Being able to process it at native speed and native density with all the cultural baggage that comes with it.
So we've synthesized the research and the blueprints you shared, and our mission today is to give you a really focused, tailored strategy for bridging that exact gap. We want to move you from just advanced to truly proficient.
And we can confirm the C2 barrier is complex. It really is. It asks you to stop being a learner and start being a fully functional listener, often under stress.
Right.
It stops being purely linguistic, and because, like you said, highly cultural and cognitive. We're not chasing definitions anymore. We're chasing intent, processing speed, and cognitive endurance.
So to cut through all the noise out there, all the advice, we've distilled everything down.
We have. We've distilled the core challenges from the evidence into 5 definitive pillars. This is the structural blueprint for the serious student who's ready to hit that native level listening.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive straight into pillar number 1. We're calling this decoding the invisible sounds. Because for the C1 listener, the biggest enemy isn't that rare, complex vocabulary word you see once a month. It's the fact that the most common, simple words, they just utterly disappear in natural speech.
They do. They vanish. And what's so fascinating at this level is that the learner usually assumes the native speaker is just rushing or, being lazy.
Yes, speaking sloppily.
Right. But in reality, native speakers are following these highly consistent, very predictable phonological rules. These rules dictate how sounds merge or drop or transform for efficiency.
And that mechanism has a name.
It does. It's collectively called connected speech, and it's not optional. It is absolutely mandatory for efficient, rapid-fire communication. If your brain doesn't learn these new rules, you are constantly playing catch-up.
Okay, and within connected speech, the research points to 2 main mechanisms, right? 2 ways that words basically mutate in the stream of speech.
Exactly. These are the 2 villains we need to train our ear to recognize. First, there's elision, which is just the complete dropping or deletion of sounds or even whole syllables that are, redundant when words are spoken quickly.
Okay, give me an example.
A classic one is the word library. Pronounced clearly, it's library. But in fast speech, a native speaker might reduce it to library. That middle vowel sound just gets dropped.
I wonder how many advanced learners even realize they're missing a whole sound there. What's another common one?
Think about fish and chips. In fast speech, that din and is almost always gone. You just hear fish and chips.
Right.
Or a word like governor. Slowly, it's 3 syllables. Governor. In a fast political chat, that middle vowel is elided and you get govna. If you're waiting to hear that full second syllable, you're already behind.
That really highlights the problem. The simple little glue words are the ones that get changed the most, but they carry all the crucial information about tense and structure.
Precisely. Which brings us to the second mechanism, assimilation. This one is arguably a bit more complex.
Why is that?
Because the sound isn't just dropped. It actually changes its quality to become more like a neighboring sound. It just makes the transition smoother and faster for the speaker's mouth. It's pure biological efficiency.
But a huge roadblock for the listener.
A massive roadblock.
So instead of a sound disappearing, it kind of morphs into something else. Can you give us an example of assimilation that's pretty much universal in English?
One of the best ones involves the N sound. The standard N is made with your tongue right behind your front teeth.
Right.
But if the next word starts with a sound made at the lips, like P or B or M, your tongue starts getting ready early. So in the phrase 10 pounds, that N sound will often assimilate into an M sound. You'll hear 10 pounds.
Wow. Okay, so the speaker isn't trying to say tem.
Not at all. Their mouth is just getting ready for the lip closure it needs for the P in pounds, and the sound just mutates as a result.
That's a perfect illustration. If the learner is listening for TEN and they hear TEM, they get that little processing stutter, that lag we talked about. So let's tie these two together with the classic example of auxiliary verbs.
Yeah, we found a fantastic example that shows this whole transformation. If you're learning formal English, you're taught to say, I would have gone.
Textbook perfection.
Absolutely. But as the research shows, that structure reduces dramatically in natural casual speech.
How so?
It immediately becomes, I would have gone.
Would have gone.
So what just happened there? The word have has been elided down to just that reduced vowel sound, A, the schwa. The learner has to hear woulda as a single unit, not two separate words.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because this is the C2 territory. The sources say it can reduce even more than that, right? Especially in fast, maybe emotional speech.
Oh yeah, it often becomes I'd have gone.
I'd have gone.
Yes, I'd have gone. So now you have 4 distinct words completely compressed into what sounds like 2 tiny sounds. The would has reduced, the have has elided. The whole thing is unrecognizable from the textbook version.
So if the C1 learner is literally waiting for the sound of would and the sound of have,
that sound never arrives, and their brain hits a critical processing lag. It's constantly trying to match the mutated sound it heard to its internal database of formal separate words, and they just don't line up.
So the goal isn't just to accept these mutations, it's to train your brain to expect them, to decode them instantly as one single unit.
That's the key.
Which shifts our focus to studying specific, let's call them phonological features that make all this connected speech possible. And the literature highlights one that is almost universally a problem for non-native speakers. The glottal stop.
Ah, the glottal stop. It's basically, well, it's a stop, a complete stoppage of air, but you do it way back in your throat at the vocal cords.
So it's like a non-sound, a silence.
In a way, yeah. It's the silence that replaces a sound. You hear it most often replacing T or D sounds at the end or in the middle of a word, especially before another consonant.
But wait, is this just lazy speech or does it have a real purpose? Why stop the air?
That's a great question. It's all about linguistic efficiency. Making a full, clear te sound takes effort. You have to move your tongue up to the ridge behind your teeth and then release.
Okay.
Stopping the air at your glottis in your throat takes way less muscular effort and time.
Yeah.
It's all about speed. If you want to speak fast, the glottal stop is your friend.
And this feature shows up so differently depending on where you are in the world, which is so important for our listener. Let's contrast the 2 big accent families here.
We see a huge difference between, say, British English, especially something like Cockney or Estuary English, and General American.
Right.
In the British example from the sources, the phrase bottle of water becomes almost unrecognizable to an untrained ear.
How does it sound?
It sounds like bolo-air.
Bolo-air.
Yeah. Notice how the T inside bottle and water is totally replaced by that glottal stop, that little catch in the throat. It creates that characteristic choppy sound.
That is so different from what happens in North America. The research points out that the American approach to that middle T is completely different.
It's a different solution to the same problem of efficiency. In American English, that medial T very often becomes what we call a T flap. It sounds much more like a light sound.
A teed sound.
Yeah, a really quick light tap of the tongue. So water sounds a lot more like waiter or water, and better becomes better. Both accents are changing the sound to be faster. They just choose different changes.
But the implication for the learner is exactly the same, right? If your brain is trained to hear the British glottal stop in bottle and then you hear an American say bottle, you still fail the test.
Absolutely. The implication is profound. If you are not actively training your brain to recognize both of these major mutated sound patterns, you're guaranteeing you'll always have that processing lag. You'll always be one step behind the conversation, trying to piece together a word that was never pronounced the way your textbook taught you.
This sounds incredibly technical, I have to say. It's almost like learning a secret sublanguage. But the sources provide this brilliant technique to help you diagnose what your brain is failing to catch. They call it reverse transcription.
This is the ultimate diagnostic tool. It completely flips the normal process on its head. Most students use transcription to check if they understood the big words, the content words.
Right.
But reverse transcription forces you to analyze the physical reality of the speech, including all the stuff your brain usually just filters out.
So explain the method. It sounds simple, but I hear the mental challenge is immense.
The assignment is very specific. You listen to a short segment, maybe 30 to 60 seconds, of really fast, complex speech.
Like what?
Unfiltered content. A legal drama where lawyers are talking fast, or a technical TED talk on AI, something where the pace and density are high. And the task is to write it down, word for word, every single sound.
And here's the crucial detail that the research really emphasizes, which makes it different from just dictation. You have to include all the tiny non-content sounds.
Yes.
The ums, the ahs, the little breaths, the likes, the reduced sounds, all of it.
This is the critical step. The C1 brain, in an effort to save energy, it actively suppresses these small sounds. It thinks they're just noise. But the shock comes when you compare your handwritten version to the official transcript.
And what's the big revelation?
The revelation is that your brain has been systematically ignoring the tiny grammatical and filler words. The articles, the prepositions, the reduced auxiliaries like will or have.
The very things that are most transformed by connected speech.
Exactly. The very things that carry the essential structure. You find out you heard the big noun, but you totally missed the subtle preposition that controlled the whole meaning of the clause.
So the surprise is twofold. First, you see the phonological changes you missed. And second, you realize just how much of natural speech is made up of those fillers and hesitations.
Precisely. And that realization moves you beyond a linguistic exercise into a cognitive one. You realize that C2 listening is about processing the entire stream of sound, not just hunting for nouns and verbs. Until you can hear the ums and the elided t's accurately, your brain is still operating in a slower, filtered mode.
You have to stop filtering and start processing everything.
Yeah, that's it. And that completes our first pillar, which moves us from the mechanics of sound into the mechanics of implied meaning.
That is a perfect transition because we are moving from the sounds themselves to what those sounds really convey about human interaction. Let's move to pillar number 2, pragmatics and reading between the lines. This is where we go from, can I hear the words, to the much harder question, do I understand the intention behind the words?
This is so important. At the C2 level, listening is profoundly about intent. The literature identifies English, especially in certain cultures, as a very high context language.
What does that mean, high context?
It means the meaning isn't always literal in the words. It's embedded in the cultural understanding of the exchange, often in what isn't said, especially with things like sarcasm, irony, or trying to avoid confrontation.
One of the analyses highlighted this beautiful, really memorable example that I think every advanced learner has run into, especially in a professional setting. Let's talk about the British disagreement.
Ah, yes. This is a textbook example of pragmatics in action. So imagine a discussion. Opinions are clashing a bit. If a British person wants to politely end the argument, they might say, I hear what you're saying.
Okay, so the C1 learner hears the literal words. They're listening to me. Great.
Right, and they think it's an invitation to keep explaining their point.
Which is a social trap.
A total social trap.
Yeah.
Because the C2 learner processes the hidden intent. What that speaker often means in that specific cultural context is, I have registered your viewpoint, I completely disagree, and I am now politely shutting this conversation down.
Wow. The gap is enormous. So the C1 learner keeps talking and creates friction, while the C2 learner understands the discussion just ended. Subtly.
Without any aggressive language at all. It's
Yeah.
the difference between hearing the language and understanding the social function of the language.
Is there an American equivalent?
I think so. A common one in a professional setting is if you present an idea and someone says, that's an interesting idea. A C1 listener might hear interesting and think it's a positive word. But the C2 learner understands that in a corporate context, interesting is often code for, I hate it, but I can't say I hate it.
Or, that's way too complicated and I'm just going to ignore it.
Exactly. So mastering C2 pragmatics is about mastering the art of the polite no or the subtle disagreement. Missing that hidden no can be disastrous professionally.
You keep pushing an idea that's already been rejected.
It's the difference between being merely functional and being truly effective and socially astute. You have to train yourself to listen for the discrepancy between the words and the situation.
And that analysis of intent leads us right to the mechanical signal that betrays all this hidden meaning. Intonation shifts.
Yes.
It's less about what they said and much more about the melody of how they said it, the rhythm and the pitch.
Intonation, the pitch, the volume, the stress. It's a powerful semantic key in English. Tiny shifts in pitch on key words can completely alter the function, and sometimes the whole meaning, of a sentence.
And if you can't hear the sounds accurately from Pillar 1, you have no chance of decoding the melody here.
They're completely connected.
So the most dramatic example the materials gave was the insult-compliment flip. How can the exact same positive words become a sharp insult just by changing the pitch?
Okay, take the phrase, "You look great today." If I say it with a steady, appreciative downward pitch, it's a genuine compliment.
Well, you look great today.
But watch what happens if I just shift the intonation a little. If
Yeah.
I take that exact phrase, "You look great today," and I put a slight questioning rise on the word great,
Oh.
the whole meaning flips. That melodic shift suddenly implies, "I'm surprised you look good," because you usually look terrible.
That is so powerful. The words are positive, but the intention carried entirely by that melody is completely corrosive.
Let's do another one just with stress. The sentence, "I wanted the blue shirt." If I stress blue, I wanted the blue shirt. I'm correcting you, not the red one. But if I stress I wanted the blue shirt. Well, now the meaning is even if you wanted the red one. The only difference is which word got the peak of the pitch, and that changes everything from clarification to confrontation.
So the C2 listener has to be actively tracking the rise and fall of speech. If you're just focused on vocabulary, you will completely miss the subtext.
Exactly. This connects back to the need for, well, critical thinking as a listener. You have to become an analytical listener, almost suspicious of simple definitions.
So constantly asking questions.
Constant questions. Why did they stress that word? What did the intonation betray about how they really feel? Skepticism, irritation, a boredom. The goal of C2 listening isn't just comprehension. It's parsing the speaker's entire emotional and intentional state.
That brings us neatly out of the world of subtle social nuance and back into pure linguistic complexity with pillar number 3. Let's talk about vocabulary density and idiomatic overload.
Okay. So when learners get to C1, they've often mastered basic vocabulary. They can handle an occasional idiom like, "It's raining cats and dogs."
Yeah.
But the research is clear that advanced speakers in real, unfiltered conversations, they aren't just using an odd idiom here and there. They're using complex structures like phrasal verbs in these dense, stacked clusters.
And that just multiplies the cognitive difficulty, right? A phrasal verb isn't one word, it's a verb plus a particle, and the meaning is almost never literal.
Think of the strain on your brain. You hear the word put, that's one simple action. You hear put up with, and your brain has to instantly override the literal meaning of put and up and access this whole other concept of tolerate.
And when those are stacked together, the processing load must just skyrocket.
It does. Let's use the comparison from the analysis. A simple C1 expression. I am surprised by the news. Clear, efficient, every word is easy.
Okay, now what's a C2 equivalent?
The advanced C2 equivalent, dense with idiomatic language, would be something like, "It took me a second to wrap my head around it, but then it finally sank in."
Wow, okay. 2 huge clusters of complexity there. Wrap my head around it, meaning to comprehend something complex.
And then sank in, a phrasal verb meaning to be fully understood, usually after a delay.
So the listener has to decode 2 separate non-literal structures, one after the other, just to understand, I was surprised.
And if you're trying to break down the individual words, wrap, head, sink in, you will fail spectacularly. You have to recognize the whole cluster as a single, indivisible unit of meaning.
And this happens constantly. I'm thinking of a business meeting. We need to look into the numbers, cut down on spending, and get ahead of the deadline.
That's 3 in one breath. If you're trying to define look and into separately, you're lost.
So this leads to what you called the safe zone warning.
Yes. It's a warning derived directly from the sources. So many learners, understandably, they cling to materials made specifically for students, those curated, vocabulary-controlled dialogues.
Which keeps them in a cognitive safe zone.
Exactly. And while that zone is comfortable, it actively prevents C2 progression. The goal isn't successful comprehension of simple content anymore. The goal is navigating complexity.
So the solution is to abandon the safe zone.
You have to. The only way forward is to dive headfirst into unfiltered content. You need to hear experts talking to experts, not teachers talking to students. Learner audio is too clean, too predictable. Real life is messy.
So what specific types of content are required for C2 growth?
You need content that is inherently dense and requires you to sustain your attention. High-level podcasts like The Daily or The Rest politics are essential. They deal with abstract, complex topics at high speed.
And beyond news.
Deep dive video essays on philosophy or advanced science or niche history. Content where the complexity of the subject just naturally forces the use of dense, specific, and often idiomatic language.
This forces your brain to deal with real-world conversational density. When two physicists are debating quantum theory, they're not slowing down or simplifying their phrasal verbs for you.
And that pressure is critical. If you can follow an hour-long discussion between two experts in a field you know nothing about, and you can still pull out the core arguments, you've bridged that C2 density gap.
That pushes us perfectly into pillar number 4, which is all about unfiltered content, the accent gauntlet. We touched on US and British standards, but this is about the danger of the comfort zone itself.
We have to acknowledge that almost all advanced learners get really comfortable with one main accent, usually General American or BBC English. They've internalized the connected speech rules for that specific dialect.
But the second they step off that familiar ground, the rules change, the vocabulary shifts, and that painful processing lag just comes roaring back.
The real world is a mess of dialects. The research is clear. If you are only comfortable with clear, standard voices, you are guaranteeing functional failure the moment you step into a real international office.
Or even just a different region of the same country.
Absolutely. This isn't just about global English. So let's give the listeners specific targets. What are the dialects they need to actively go find to grow their comfort zone?
Let's do it.
Okay. They need to target exposure that fundamentally challenges their familiar phonology. So number 1, a thick Scottish accent.
Why Scottish?
The rolled R, completely different vowel sounds. A phrase like out and about can become unrecognizable. Second, a fast-paced Indian English business meeting. This often blends super sophisticated professional vocabulary with a totally distinct rhythm and stress pattern. And third, a rural Australian slang-heavy conversation.
That's a double challenge.
It is. You get unique slang like chook or arvo, combined with massive vowel shifts. It's a workout.
And the sources also emphasize the regional differences within the big native countries.
Yes, you absolutely have to seek out regional UK accents like Scouse or Mancunian, and really importantly, Southern US dialects. A genuine Southern US dialect with its own rhythm and vocabulary can be as challenging as an accent from another continent. Proficiency means flexibility.
I wonder, though, how do you practice this without just getting totally overwhelmed and giving up?
The immersion has to be forceful, but strategic. Go on YouTube, search for these specific accents in unscripted interviews or documentaries, and just immerse yourself for 10-15 minutes without subtitles.
No subtitles.
No subtitles. The critical instruction is to just endure the confusion. You have to force your brain to find the pattern in the noise. Your brain is a pattern-finding machine. You're just giving it new data to work with.
So you're building neurological scaffolding for flexibility, teaching the brain that the core meaning is the same, even if the accent, the packaging, changes radically.
Exactly. That builds incredible adaptability. And that is the hallmark of C2 listening. If you can understand a nuanced discussion on tax policy from a fast-talking Glaswegian, you're ready for anything.
Okay, we've covered phonology, intent, density, and accents. Now we move to pillar number 5, which feels like the most professional and maybe the hardest to master, the cognitive load.
This is a critical transition. We're not talking about external language anymore. We're talking about internal brain function. C2 listening, at its core, is about stamina.
It's an endurance sport.
It is. It's measured by how long you can maintain peak processing efficiency.
So explain this phenomenon the sources call the stamina cliff. What does that feel like?
The stamina cliff is that sudden point where your brain just disengages. It's not a slow decline. It's an abrupt shutdown of your cognitive resources. A student can often maintain peak focus for 5, maybe 10 minutes, solving all those puzzles we've discussed.
But the effort is intense.
So intense that it just depletes their cognitive reserves. Their brain just shuts off after about 30 minutes of a high-level lecture, especially if the topic is dense.
That is a massive barrier in a professional or academic setting. You can't just check out of the second half of a 90-minute strategy meeting.
No, that's the difference between success and failure. So we need an endurance training program for the brain. We have to treat it like training for a marathon, where the muscle is your working memory.
So lay out the program. How do we systematically increase that processing window?
It has to be structured. Start with 20 minutes of a difficult high-level lecture.
Yeah.
That unfiltered content, maybe on a subject you know well, so you're not battling vocabulary and stamina at the same time.
Okay, 20 minutes.
Once 20 minutes feels comfortable, you push to 40. Then you incrementally push to a full hour of sustained, high-intensity listening.
And the research highlights a really crucial and kind of counterintuitive instruction here. do not take notes at first.
Right, this goes against every study skill we've ever learned.
So why the no notes rule?
Taking notes lets you offload the processing burden. You only have to hold the information in your short-term memory long enough to scribble it down. We are deliberately making the task harder.
You want to force the brain to do all the work.
The focus has to be purely on following the logic of the argument in real time, holding all the preceding information in your working memory. We're training the brain's internal RAM, not its ability to write things down.
So if the speaker makes a point at minute 5 and then refers back to it at minute 45, you have to have held on to it that whole time.
Exactly. You're building the mental infrastructure to manage complex arguments over a long period.
And how do we test this? What's the ultimate metric that tells you if you were truly listening or just passively hearing?
The stamina test is brutal, but it's necessary. After the session, turn it off and ask yourself, can I summarize the speaker's 3 main arguments, including the evidence they used?
And if you can't?
If you can't articulate the main takeaways and the core structure of the argument, it means you were just hearing words. You were absorbing syllables, but your brain failed to synthesize and retain the information. Your stamina gave out before the hour was up.
That is a tough metric, but a really essential one. So to wrap up the 5 pillars, the research introduces this ultra-advanced technique. It's like the C2 version of a well-known method, and they call it the ghosting workout.
Right, so everyone knows shadowing repeating the speaker instantly to work on pronunciation. That's great for B2. But ghosting is designed specifically as an intense cognitive load exercise. It's all about stamina and working memory.
So explain the mechanism. How is it different from just shadowing?
With ghosting, you're also repeating the speaker, but you deliberately create a gap. You stay 2 to 3 seconds behind them.
A 2 to 3 second delay.
And that delay, that gap, is the key to the whole workout. It forces a very specific kind of mental juggling.
Why is maintaining that gap so powerful? How does that build stamina?
It forces you to manage 2 cognitive tasks at once. You have to hold the speaker's entire previous sentence, the words, the grammar, the intonation, in your working memory just long enough to repeat it accurately.
While you are simultaneously processing and decoding their next sentence in real time?
Exactly. It's not just copying sounds, it's delayed processing on a loop.
So you're basically listening to 2 sentences at the same time. The one you're saying and the one you're hearing and preparing to say next. That sounds incredibly demanding.
It's described as the equivalent of weightlifting for your brain. It directly pressures your ability to process and retain sequential information at speed. If you can sustain ghosting for 15 minutes with complex content, your working memory is absolutely at C2 levels.
This whole 5-pillar blueprint it's demanding. We've asked the listener to decode invisible sounds, analyze intent, process dense vocabulary, master accents, and build mental stamina. It's inevitable that people are going to hit moments of really intense frustration with this.
We have to address that frustration.
Yeah.
When you are so close to the top, missing a subtle joke or failing to grasp a nuanced point feels so much worse. It's really discouraging.
So how should a serious learner reframe that feeling?
The research offers a critical reframing. That frustration, that painful, immediate feeling that you missed something. It is not a sign of failure. It is a highly positive diagnostic sign.
How so?
That frustration is your brain actively identifying what it doesn't know yet. It means the system is working. If you weren't proficient enough to even notice the missing nuance or the hidden disagreement, you wouldn't be frustrated. You'd just be blissfully unaware.
So embrace the frustration as data.
Exactly. It's pinpointing the next thing you need to target.
That shift in perspective is everything. It turns discouragement into motivation. And the ultimate goal is developing what the research calls the proficient mindset.
Yes. The difference between advanced and proficient is tied to one simple trait: insatiable curiosity. The C2 listener becomes obsessed with the details. They're constantly asking, why did they stress that word? Why did they use that phrasal verb instead of the simple dictionary word?
You're moving from seeking the definition of the word to seeking the reason for the word's choice and its form.
It transforms listening from a passive task into an active analytical skill. You are basically turning into an armchair linguist in every conversation. That curiosity is what finally collapses the gap between C1 and C2.
We really hope this deep dive into the 5 pillars gives you a clear, structured path to push past that C1 plateau. You're not starting over, you are refining the final, most challenging 5% of your listening capacity.
So implement the reverse transcription method this week. Start your endurance training. Keep seeking out that unfiltered content that makes you just a little bit uncomfortable. That discomfort is where the growth is.
Before we sign off, since the sources mention these specialized listening skills for high-stakes contexts like medical or legal English, let's end with a provocative thought for you to chew on this week.
An excellent idea. Connecting these skills to their ultimate application.
Okay, so we've established that C2 listening lets you decode subtle intent, and stamina lets you follow complex logic for an hour. So consider this. What specific high-stakes professional context, like a cross-cultural negotiation where every word matters, where courtroom testimony, where misunderstanding nuance could have life-altering consequences, what will be the first place you apply this new level of endurance and nuance decoding?
Think about where this proficiency translates directly into high-value professional output. Target that setting and let that goal drive your learning. We encourage you to analyze your own listening habits and try just one new technique. Maybe ghosting, maybe the accent gauntlet this week.
Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material, your research, your notes, and really cut right to the core of what you need to know. Our mission today is, well, it's highly specific, it's advanced, and I think it's incredibly challenging for a lot of learners.
It really is.
We're setting our sights beyond that comfortable plateau of B2 language comprehension. So if you're joining us for this, you're already performing at a, remarkably high level.
Right. You can read, you can write, you can generally follow complex spoken English without too much trouble.
But there's a difference, don't you?
Absolutely. You feel it.
Yeah.
It's the difference between understanding the language when it's delivered perfectly, in a quiet environment, and truly mastering it.
Mastering the subtle logic.
The subtle logic and the lightning fast micro details of native spontaneous speech, that gap, that's the C1, C2 hurdle.
And that's what we're tackling today.
That's the plan.
Absolutely. So for the learner who's moving towards C1 and C2, the comprehension challenge isn't really about the size of their vocabulary anymore, is it?
No, not primarily. It's about processing speed, it's about contextual inference, and as we're about to see, it's about the sheer music of the language.
The music. I like that.
That's the high-stakes scenario we have to prepare you for. A B2 speaker, they can generally handle a source that's carefully prepared, acoustically clean.
Like a quiet TED Talk.
A quiet TED Talk, a scripted news broadcast, maybe a very patient conversation with a slow speaker. But those perfect environments, they vanish in the real world.
Okay, let's unpack that. Give us the specific real-world complexity, the thing that makes an advanced learner suddenly stumble, even when they technically know all the words being said.
Well, think about dynamic, unstructured, and honestly, sometimes hostile listening environments.
Okay.
You're trying to follow two friends who are talking fast, they're laughing, they're interrupting each other, and using these high-context idioms, all while you're standing in a loud pub with music blaring and glasses clanking.
A total nightmare scenario for comprehension.
Or think about a fast-paced political debate. You've got multiple people talking, not only interrupting, but using these sophisticated rhetorical tricks to subtly undermine each other.
In those situations, every millisecond counts. The perfect environment is gone, and suddenly those tiny details, a subtle change in pitch, a single connective phrase, they become mission critical.
And if you miss one, the entire logical thread is it's broken.
Gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our focus today is essentially dissecting that final 10% of language acquisition. We're going to explore how pitch, advanced rhetorical patterns, and this specialized predictive vocabulary are the keys.
The keys to unlocking that final layer of native fluency.
It's about moving from analyzing what is said to understanding how it's said, and most importantly, why it's said that way.
And to do that, we need to focus on things that are almost entirely subconscious for a native speaker. Started with the very sound, the melody of the language itself.
Precisely.
So let's jump straight into what I think is one of the most surprising and profound nuggets from the source material. The concept of intonation as grammar.
Yes. This is huge.
I think most learners, even at a high B2 level, they get that intonation conveys emotion. Right? A rising tone for surprise, a falling one for finality.
Standard stuff.
But the idea that pitch and stress don't just convey a feeling, but that they fundamentally change the grammatical and the logical meaning of a sentence, that feels like the real C2 secret.
It absolutely is, because at this level, phonology isn't optional. It's the It's the structural scaffolding of the logic. If you only process the words, you are only getting a fraction of the full message.
So the meaning can completely flip.
Completely. The difference in logical meaning that's communicated just through how a word is emphasized is massive. It can change the subject of the sentence. It can change the object. It can question the very premise of the statement.
Which is why you say that for the C2 listener, 50% of the message is hidden in that melody.
At least 50%.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting because we have a perfect illustrative example from the source material that really breaks this down. We need to look closely at the sentence. I didn't say we should go there.
Right. A simple sentence on the surface. Spoken plainly, it's just a neutral statement of denial. I didn't say we should go there.
Neutral. Okay.
But watch what happens when we shift the stress. This is what the C2 listener has to master in real time. You have to instantly interpret the speaker's intent based on that melodic contour.
So let's take the first one. The native speaker places the stress squarely on the pronoun. I didn't say we should go there.
Okay, what does that imply to you?
Well, it feels like you're pointing the finger at someone else.
Exactly. The grammatical implication instantly shifts. You're not just denying the statement itself, you're actively contrasting yourself with someone else.
So you're saying, I didn't say it, but someone else did.
Someone else did. Maybe you did, maybe Jim did. The listener instantly knows the conversational focus is now on the source of the suggestion.
Not the denial itself.
Precisely. If you miss that stress, you miss the entire context of who started the idea, and you're going to misinterpret why the speaker is being so defensive.
Okay, now let's shift the emphasis. Let's move the stress to the auxiliary verb should. So, I didn't say we should go there.
A completely different meaning, a fundamental shift in logic.
How so?
Now, the speaker isn't denying the act of saying something, and they're not denying being the source of it. They are questioning the necessity, the obligation of the action.
Ah, I see. So they're implying, I might have mentioned going there as an idea, but I certainly didn't say it was required.
Or when it was obligatory. The entire conversation pivots from a question of fact, did you say it, to a question of advice or necessity, was it required? All because of that one tiny stressed modal verb.
It's astounding how much weight one syllable can carry. Let's solidify this with another example just to really drive it home. Let's move beyond denial and show how stress can define the scope of negation.
Good idea.
How about the phrase, she's not giving him the car?
Okay. If the stress lands on the negation itself, she's not giving him the car. That's just a plain factual statement.
Right. The action is denied. Simple.
Simple. The listener knows, okay, the car is not being given.
But if the stress shifts to the object, she's not giving him the car.
Now what's the implication?
The implication is she is giving him something.
Exactly, just not the car. Maybe she's giving him the motorcycle, maybe it's the keys to the apartment. The stress shifts the focus from denying the act itself to creating a contrast with the object.
So for the C2 listener, hearing that emphasis on car instantly opens the door to the next logical question. Well, what is she giving him then?
And if you miss that stress, you spend your mental energy trying to confirm the negation when the real meaning, the real point of the conversation lies in that implied comparison.
This just proves the point that the C2 listener can't afford to wait until the end of the sentence to build meaning. You have to be processing these vocal cues instantly.
Instantly. The goal is to process the melodic contour, the rising and falling pitch, the timing, the little pauses, before you even fully process the individual words. The melody carries the logic.
If you ignore it,
you're essentially guessing at the speaker's true intent.
So how do you train this skill? We need a practical, actionable technique. And I love the one that's provided here, melody mapping.
Melody mapping is so powerful because it forces you to bypass your internal translator. It's an exercise where you listen to a native speaker and it suggests something dense, like a fast-paced radio debate.
Something messy.
Exactly, something messy. And your only job, your only task, is to hum the rhythm and pitch of their speech. No words, just hum.
That sounds deceptively simple, but wait, let me push back on that a little bit. Isn't there a risk that by focusing purely on humming the melody, you're actually distracting the learner from processing the challenging C2 vocabulary, which they still need to master?
That's a fair point, a valid concern. But you have to see melody mapping as a training tool, not the whole workout. You do it alongside traditional vocabulary practice.
It's about isolation.
It's about isolation. Its effectiveness comes from that. When you focus only on words, your brain defaults to translation, interpretation, analysis of definitions. When you hum the melody, you're engaging a different part of your brain, the part that interprets patterns, emotional cadence, and grammatical function through pure sound.
So you're separating the logical function from the lexical function.
Yeah, that's it. And the source material says this is critical because, as we said, 50% of the logical meaning is hidden in that music. If a long, complex sentence has a clear, powerful downward sweep and a punch on a particular verb, that tells you that verb is the central action. It's the core focus of the speaker's message, no matter how many subordinate clauses came before it.
So you don't even need to know every single word in that subordinate clause.
Not if you know the melody is pointing you directly to the central action.
And for practice material, we want high-density, real-world complexity, right? Not just simple, clear dialogue from a textbook.
Absolutely not. You have to seek out panel discussions, political interviews, academic roundtables. These environments are perfect because the speakers are focused on logic and persuasion. Their intonation is serving a very high functional purpose.
Okay, so what's the process?
Start small, listen for 30 seconds, then pause it. Try to hum the contour back. Then listen again, this time paying attention to where the major peaks and valleys of stress landed. If you can map the melody, you can map the logical intent. It's the ultimate training tool for processing context over content.
Okay, moving on from the sound to, let's say, the structural architecture of advanced thought. We need to address how native speakers link their ideas together at this C1, C2 level.
Right, sophisticated signposting.
Exactly. Most B2 learners, they're experts at recognizing the standard transitions. However, on the other hand, first, second, third, and of course, in conclusion.
The class.
But when the argument moves from simple description to, say, detailed policy or a fine-grained analysis, those explicit signposts become far more subtle.
They integrate into the sentence structure itself. They become a kind of verbal shorthand for really complex logical relationships.
And native speakers, especially when they're building complex arguments in, academic papers, business negotiations, detailed reports, they use connectors that require a much deeper understanding of logic than just simple opposition or addition.
And if you misinterpret that connector, you completely misread the relationship between the two clauses. The whole argument falls apart for you.
What's fascinating here is that the sources identify these specific C1, C2 connectors, that if you miss them, you lose the entire thread of the argument. So we need to really analyze these and provide some clear context.
Let's start with a great one, that being the case. A B2 speaker might use something simpler like therefore or because of that. But that being the case is different. It acts as a highly efficient, very formal summary of the entire preceding argument. It instantly signals that everything that follows is a direct consequence. A logical necessity based on the premise you just established.
So it's verbal shorthand for, given all the facts we just discussed and have accepted as true, here is the unavoidable conclusion or action.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Can you put that into a complex sentence just to show its weight in a real context?
Sure. Imagine a budget meeting. Someone says, the quarterly reports confirm a 15% increase in operational expenses and a simultaneous flattening of projected revenue. That being the case, we must now re-examine the proposed investment in the new factory build.
I see. If the listener just hears, therefore, it sounds basic. But hearing that being the case signals a formal, established logical pivot that's based on irrefutable evidence.
Right. And if you're not familiar with it, you might just mistake it for some unnecessary preamble and completely miss the moment the speaker shifted from stating facts to proposing a solution.
Okay, now let's consider another one. By the same token, this is so much more subtle than just saying also or similarly.
Oh, worlds more subtle. By the same token implies a deeper parity between two ideas. It connects the current point using the exact same logic, the same rationale, or the same governing principle that was applied to the previous point.
So it's not just that they're similar, it's that they share a philosophical or structural foundation.
That's it. It shows a shared foundation for both arguments. For instance, protecting intellectual property rights incentivizes private innovation and creativity. By the same token, regulations must be strictly enforced to prevent monopolies from stifling the very competition they were designed to create.
I see. It's saying the principle of incentivizing creativity also requires the principle of enforcement. They are two sides of the same coin, governed by the same philosophy of market management.
Exactly. And if you're listening to a complex policy discussion and you miss by the same token, you might think the speaker has just randomly changed topics.
When in fact, they're reinforcing their central principle with a parallel, structurally identical example.
You've got it.
And then there's the conditional connector that defines scope. insofar as...
Yes, insofar as introduces a very precise limitation or scope. It translates roughly to the degree or extent that. It's absolutely critical for defining boundaries in any kind of formal assessment.
So an example.
The restructuring plan can be deemed a success insofar as it reduced our debt obligations. However, it failed to improve employee morale.
So the statement doesn't claim total success. It restricts the definition of success only to the debt reduction part.
Precisely. The implication for you, the learner, is that if you mishear this as in fact, or in addition, you completely misrepresent the scope and limitations of the speaker's assessment. You could misunderstand the success or failure of the entire subject.
And we should probably add one more, a formal connector that signals a necessary exception, one that's often missed. Save for.
Oh, that's a beautifully formal phrase. You hear it a lot in academic or legal English.
What does it mean exactly?
Save for means with the exception of. It's a very formal and efficient way to introduce a single exclusion without disrupting the rest of a complex rule or statement.
So something like, all documents relating to the negotiation are available for public inspection, save for those containing proprietary financial forecasts.
Perfect example. The C2 listener understands that the main rule inspection is allowed, is absolute, except for that single explicitly defined condition. The vocabulary is known, but it's the function of that vocabulary in linking these complex, nuanced ideas that is the final frontier of listening.
Okay, moving from abstract logic to linguistic creativity, let's tackle the challenge of idiomatic flexibility. Most advanced language programs, they spend months on lists of standard idioms. The source material here suggests that this kind of rote memorization is just insufficient for C2 mastery.
It is. Memorizing a static list is the B2 approach. C1, C2 mastery requires understanding the core metaphor so well that you can follow what natives inevitably play with, modify, or even break the idiom to suit their rhetorical needs.
Because native speakers hate cliches.
They despise them. They want language that feels fresh and specific to the moment.
And the challenge comes when the learner hears a familiar idiom that's been changed or extended, and their brain defaults to searching for the exact standard phrase they memorized.
And that search causes a momentary blockage. It slows down your processing speed, and you fall behind.
Let's look at this specific example we have, modifying the icing on the cake. The standard phrase, suggests a positive, often trivial bonus on top of something that's already good.
Right. But a native speaker might customize it too. That's the icing on an already very expensive cake.
And that modification changes the tone completely. It adds a whole new layer of commentary.
Totally. By adding already very expensive, the speaker introduces a sense of resignation, maybe even sarcasm. They're highlighting that the baseline situation, the cake, was already costly or difficult.
And the icing, the bonus, is perhaps now just overkill or an unnecessary extravagance.
Exactly. The literal meaning of icing and cake is completely overridden by the emotional context embedded in those specific modifiers. The listener has to follow that nuanced logic even when the phrasing is customized.
But isn't there a danger here? That by encouraging this focus on personalized idioms, we might confuse the listener about what the standard version even is. How do you tell the difference between genuine mastery and just guessing?
That's where focusing on the core metaphor provides the guardrails. You have to know that the cake represents the baseline situation and the icing represents the final non-essential addition. The C2 skill is recognizing that the speaker is simply defining the nature of the cake. Is it expensive, bland, poisonous? And the nature of the icing. Is it sweet, artificial, delicious? If you understand the structural components of the metaphor, you can absorb the modification instantly.
So if I hear someone say, that's the last nail in the coffin, which was already poorly constructed and lined with cheap velvet, I know the core metaphor is the final element that causes failure, but the added details tell me the speaker thought the whole situation was weak and shoddy from the very beginning.
Precisely. The key is comfort with the figurative space the idiom occupies. This level of flexibility is what separates rote memorization from genuine native command, and it significantly enhances your ability to follow rapid, creative conversation.
This next section takes us deeper into the why of word choice. We're moving beyond simple comprehension into active analysis. This is the professional tip, listening for rhetorical devices.
Yeah.
When you listen to a high-level speaker, a CEO, a politician, an authoritative voice in the media, they are not just speaking. They're constructing arguments, using specific, time-tested persuasive techniques.
They are absolutely deploying rhetorical strategies, and they're designed to impact your memory, your emotion, your political bias. The advanced listener has to shift from merely understanding the facts to analyzing the structure of the presentation.
And the intentionality behind the word choice.
The intent is everything.
So let's discuss some of these devices, starting with anaphora. We mentioned alliteration is used for memorability, but anaphora feels far more impactful for high-stakes listening.
It is. Anaphora is the deliberate repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences. You have to train yourself to immediately flag this repetition as a massive signal of deliberate intent.
And the question is always, why did they repeat that specific phrase 3 times?
Always. And the answer is usually about emphasis, cadence, and creating a sense of urgency. It builds an emotional rhythm, it creates momentum, and makes the core concept feel undeniable.
Like in political campaigning.
A perfect example. The speaker wants a concept to resonate. They might say, "We demand transparency from our leaders. We demand accountability for their decisions. We demand a clean slate for the future of this city."
The repetition of "we demand" creates a powerful, unified emotional rhythm.
It does. The C2 listener needs to recognize anaphora not as some accidental linguistic overlap, but as a calculated persuasive tool. It's designed to move you, the audience, from passive listening to active emotional engagement.
And if you miss that structural device,
you miss the core of the speaker's emotional strategy.
Okay, let's turn to hyperbole. The use of extreme, over-the-top words for what might seem like a small problem. This is so critical for understanding subtext, especially in critical or political commentary.
Hyperbole signals opinion, it signals passion, and often it's a deliberate exaggeration for rhetorical effect. It's designed to provoke a reaction from you. So if a journalist describes a minor policy adjustment as a catastrophic collapse of the free market or the absolute destruction of the middle class, the C2 listener knows something is up.
Right. They know the speaker's intent is to maximize the emotional response and political resistance far beyond the actual measured impact of the regulation.
That's the goal.
But how do we differentiate between legitimate passion, a speaker who genuinely believes their description, and manipulative exaggeration? Is there a linguistic rule for that, or is it purely contextual and social?
That's the critical juncture. That's where linguistic mastery has to transition into social intelligence. There is no hard and fast rule that says catastrophic is always hyperbole.
So what's the tell?
The C2 skill is recognizing the register mismatch. If a speaker uses academic, measured, calm language for 90% of their speech and then suddenly drops in an extreme, emotionally charged term like destruction or calamity, the advanced listener flags that dissonance.
That mismatch tells you they've shifted from presenting facts to deploying an emotional tool.
Exactly. So the takeaway isn't just knowing what the words mean. It's about recognizing the manipulative or persuasive function they serve within the discourse. You have to understand that extremes are generally used to advance an agenda, not just to state a fact.
Recognizing the intent behind the rhetoric. That's what elevates the learner from being a student of the language to a master analyst of communication.
You are now listening for the speaker's strategy, not just their content.
And this analytical muscle is what leads us to one of the most powerful mental exercises outlined in the sources, the reverse summary.
The reverse summary is essential because it forces you to move beyond the factual. Most of B2 practice is all about summarizing what the speaker said. The reverse summary focuses on implication, attitude, and subtext, the true intent.
How exactly does the learner put this into practice? What are the steps?
Okay, first you have to choose high-stakes content. A difficult diplomatic press conference, a tense interview with the CEO, an exchange with an evasive politician. Then, instead of writing down the factual answers they give, you take notes on the elements of their delivery, and then you practice summarizing what the speaker implied.
What specific elements should you be analyzing?
I'd focus on 3 things. First, attitude consistency. Did their tone actually match their words? Second, evasion metrics. Did they directly answer the question, or did they pivot to something else?
And the third?
Certainty level. Did they use tentative language like "we hope to," or certain definitive language like "we will"?
Okay, let's use a detailed scenario. Imagine you're listening to an interview with a business leader who's being asked about a potential scandal.
Okay, so if the leader is maintaining overly intense eye contact, using excessive legalistic jargon, avoiding direct numbers related to the incident, and constantly pivoting back to achievements from 5 years ago.
Her factual summary is going to be pretty thin.
Very thin, but your reverse summary would state something like, implied a defensive high-stakes posture, avoiding accountability by using a deliberately evasive register focused on historical success rather than current metrics.
And the use of dense jargon suggests an intent to confuse the listener rather than to inform.
That's a perfect reverse summary.
Wow, that really does develop that crucial social intelligence you need to fully grasp conversations in English. In native interactions, so much of the true meaning is in what's left unsaid or what's signaled through tone and pace.
And if you can consistently and accurately write the reverse summary, you are processing English at a native social level. You're not just following the words, you are analyzing the speaker's motive, their trustworthiness, and their actual position on the issue, regardless of the words they use. That is mastery.
We've established that these C1, C2 tests, they happen in the chaos of real life, not just in quiet rooms. So we need to address the distraction challenge, this enormous gap between a quiet practice room and noisy, messy reality.
This is a major failure point for so many advanced learners. You can ace a vocabulary test in silence, but the moment a siren goes off outside, or background chatter surges, or the phone connection glitches,
Your comprehension just falls off a cliff.
it does. You know the words, but you lack the cognitive filtration skills.
Why does this happen, though, even for highly advanced learners?
Because advanced language study often allows for this kind of passive, relaxed listening. To achieve C2 mastery, you have to build the mental muscle of selective auditory attention. Your brain needs to be trained, actively trained, to filter the noise and force its focus only onto the specific English signal you're targeting.
So it's a cognitive discipline, almost like training a mental spotlight, not just a linguistic one.
That's a great way to put it.
So what's the practice recommendation to forge this mental muscle? We need to move beyond just telling people to go listen in a loud cafe.
Right. You need controlled, high-level distraction. I'd recommend a staged practice.
Okay, what's stage one?
Stage 1, low interruption tasks. Listen to dense content like an academic lecture while you're doing simple nonverbal physical chores, doing the dishes, folding laundry, light cleaning. This demands sustained focus without requiring a lot of mental energy for the task itself.
And stage two?
Active sensory interference. Listen to complex content while you're walking in a busy, unpredictable environment like a city park or a subway platform where you have to actively track movement and navigate obstacles.
Okay, that's a step up. And stage three?
Information-dense distraction. Listen to your target English content while you simultaneously have a non-English radio show or talk show playing softly in the background. Your brain is forced to process two streams of information, which drastically improves its ability to prioritize the English signal.
You're deliberately simulating the conditions of a loud professional meeting or a chaotic social event where your brain has to work harder to maintain focus on the linguistic input.
Exactly. You are teaching your auditory cortex to prioritize English signals over ambient noise, which is what natives do subconsciously in a noisy restaurant. If you only practice in silence, you never develop this necessary filter. This is about integrating the language into your life by forcing simultaneous cognitive loads.
Okay, let's pivot to the final major hurdle, overcoming the vocabulary plateau in the C1 to C2 leap. As we established, at C1, most common words are already known. The difference then lies in predictable relationships.
It's not about knowing obscure words anymore. It's about mastering collocations and register, the specialized, naturalistic partnerships that words form. The final hurdle isn't word recognition, it's word predictability within specific contexts.
Let's use the example we had, the word change. An advanced learner knows the definition, but that word is often functionally useless in high-level discourse without its specific formal partners.
The word pairs.
The correct word pairs.
The C2 listener knows the specific range of adjectives that pair with change, and they know which register each pairing belongs to. If you are reading a policy document, you expect to hear fundamental change. If you're reading a political manifesto, you might expect radical change.
Okay, let's break down the examples provided for change just to illustrate this predictive power. If a speaker uses the adjective fundamental.
Fundamental change. That implies a deep, structural, basic shift in nature, often something philosophical or intellectual. It's measured, it's serious, and it's very common in academic or legal registers.
Now contrast that with radical change.
Radical change is generally quicker, more forceful. It often implies an extreme break from tradition or existing norms. It carries a more intense, sometimes revolutionary connotation than fundamental.
So listening for radical instantly cues you to expect a swift, severe transformation, probably in a political context.
Right, and then you have the opposite end of the spectrum when the speaker wants to minimize the impact.
They'll use incremental change.
Exactly. That word choice immediately signals that the change is small, gradual, and happening step by step over time. If a policy expert begins a sentence with, "We propose incremental," the C2 listener's brain already knows the next noun will be change or a synonym.
And you simultaneously know the speed and the scope of the proposed modification is slow and safe.
That's the predictive power.
Finally, sweeping changes.
Sweeping changes implies a large scope and magnitude. It covers many different areas at the same time. It suggests a thorough, comprehensive overhaul. Recognizing these established word pairs provides that crucial predictive benefit.
Okay, to really drive this home and make sure we've covered the depth here, let's take a second high-level noun that is critical for policy and business discussions. The word framework.
Excellent choice. B2 learners know framework means a structure. C2 listeners know its partners. So if a CEO says, "We need a conceptual,"
the C2 listener is already anticipating conceptual framework, which means the theoretical underpinning, the guiding ideas of the plan. It suggests the speaker is focused on abstract thought, not practical implementation.
Correct. But if a politician says, "We must establish a robust,"
They're signaling robust framework, which means the structure has to be strong, resilient, able to withstand pressure or stress. Her listener now knows the speaker is focused on stability and durability, probably in an engineering or a legal context.
What if a speaker is describing the process of how things get done in an office? They might refer to an operating
framework. And that immediately cues the listener to expect a discussion about internal rules, procedures, and practical guidelines for daily action.
By knowing these strong collocations, these established word pairs, you can anticipate what is coming next in the sentence, even if the speaker is talking really quickly. This anticipation reduces the cognitive effort required to process the incoming sound waves,
which has the effect of making fast native speech feel much slower and significantly more manageable. You aren't processing every single syllable in isolation, you're just confirming expectations that were set by the strong collocation. This is true C2 efficiency. This is predictive listening.
That's the goal.
What an incredible deep dive into the final stages of advanced listening mastery. We've covered a huge amount of ground here.
We really have.
We've moved from the microscopic details of pitch and phonology through the architectural framework of sophisticated signposts and into the psychological analysis required for mastering rhetorical intent in subtext.
And we covered the necessity of training your selective auditory attention to handle real-world distraction through staged, challenging listening practice.
Right.
And we finished by demonstrating how focusing intently on collocations and specialized word pairs provides that crucial predictive benefit you need to keep pace with rapid native speech.
So these 5 components, intonation, logical signposts, rhetorical intent, selective attention, and collocations, that defines the final path to native level mastery.
It's the whole package.
The journey to this level demands deliberate, high-intensity effort. Our call to action for you, the learner, is clear. Stop relying on content that's labeled easy English.
You've moved past that stage.
You need to deliberately seek out material that challenges your brain and pushes your boundaries. Find the complex arguments, the noisy environments, the speakers who use these nuanced rhetorical techniques and integrated signposts. That is where the growth happens.
And, every single aspect we discussed today relies on information that isn't carried by the surface-level definition of the words themselves. We noted that, based on our source material, 50% of the logical meaning is hidden in the intonation, in the melody. And this raises an important question for you to mull over as you integrate this new knowledge. If the acoustic elements hold half of the logical meaning, what other nonverbal or subtextual cues in advanced English communication might you still be missing?
Things like rapid changes in body language.
Or shared cultural references that go unspoken, or social norms about interruptions. What might be there that could complete the remaining 50% of the message?
That is a fascinating thought, the ultimate non-linguistic layer of fluency. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the science of native fluency.
Keep learning, keep pushing your boundaries, and happy listening. Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex source material and extract the maximum insight, giving you the shortcut to genuine proficiency. Today, we are not just looking at language learning, we are charting a course for the summit.
That's a great way to put it. We really are. We're leaving the foothills of fluency behind, and we're starting the ascent into C2 proficiency.
And C2 it's a level that's so often misunderstood.
It really is. People think it just means knowing a ton of vocabulary, right? But it doesn't. Not really. It means mastering the complex social, psychological, and, the specialized dynamics of the language.
It sounds intense, and I think that's because it is. This is where language ability really transforms into intellectual agility. So our mission in this deep dive is to guide you through these final, most complex stages of understanding English, and we're going to do that by focusing on 5 specific advanced listening strategies.
Yeah, the sources call them the C2 proficiency pillars.
The C2 proficiency pillars. I like that.
We'll be extracting very specific, actionable techniques. You'll learn how to, say, survive a chaotic multi-speaker debate without losing the thread.
Which is incredibly hard.
Incredibly hard. And you'll learn how to instantly shift your language processing into specialized technical domains. And, this is the big one, how to identify when a speaker is using language to manipulate your perspective.
I am genuinely fascinated by the depth of this final push. I mean, what this deep dive seems to reveal is that C2 mastery isn't just about what you hear. It's about how you analyze and prioritize that information in real time.
Exactly. This is all about giving you the tools to stop being just a fluent recipient of information and, start becoming a master analyst of communication.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental journey to the summit. Where do we start?
We start with a skill that immediately separates the prepared academic from the effective real-world operator.
Let's begin with pillar number 11, which the sources call navigating multi-speaker overlap. They define this as the ultimate real-world test, and I think that's just spot on, because it highlights this huge gap between how we practice and how we have to perform.
It's a massive gap. Think about the training materials most people use. They're curated. They're clean.
Right. A textbook, a news broadcast, even a podcast like this one to some extent.
Exactly. There's an unspoken agreement. Speaker A finishes their point, and then Speaker B takes over. It's polite.
So the listener can just focus on one smooth, linear stream of logic. It's comfortable.
But the moment you step into a high-stakes environment, a fast-moving seminar, a tense negotiation,
or even just a spirited dinner argument with friends.
Yes. That etiquette just evaporates. The communication environment becomes, for lack of a better word, chaotic.
A high-intensity crucible. That's what the sources call it.
And that's what it is. Real conversations have constant verbal overlap. People finishing each other's sentences, sudden interjections, simultaneous arguments. The pace forces an enormous amount of information to be processed in a fraction of the time.
So a lower-level listener, they might understand that a lot is happening, but they lose the critical threads. They just get overwhelmed.
They get overwhelmed. But the proficient listener, the C2 master, has to maintain several cognitive tracks at the same time. And this is where the sources introduce the core skill needed for this.
Which is polychronic listening.
Polychronic listening. It's a brilliant term because it acknowledges that you, the listener, are operating in multiple concurrent information timelines.
So it's no longer about single-threaded comprehension. It's a fundamental shift in how you manage your cognitive load.
It really is. And to do that, you're not just listening for words anymore. You're tracking the entire dynamics of the room. It's an auditory and social balancing act.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are the specific elements we need to track simultaneously?
Well, the sources suggest something we can call the 3-track method for active polychronic listening.
That's a 3-track method, okay.
So track 1 is the foundational one, filtering and maintaining the main thread.
The main argument.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's say the discussion is about a corporate merger, and suddenly 2 people interrupt the CEO to argue about which room to hold the next meeting in.
Okay, so logistical noise.
Right. The C2 listener has to instantly filter that out, process it, but file it as low priority, and hold on to the CEO's central argument.
Right.
Is this merger financially beneficial or not? If you lose that main thread, you've lost the entire conversation.
That seems incredibly demanding on the brain. How do you actually do that? How do you filter one thing while retaining another?
It's about priority and pattern recognition. Your brain learns to assign weight to voices based on context. Who has the most authority? Who's using the relevant jargon? Whose tone signals a conclusion? The interruptions are still processed, but they're automatically tagged as lower priority side data.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's track 1. What's track 2?
Track 2 is identifying the dominance hierarchy.
So who is leading the conversation and who is trying to jump in?
Yes, and this goes way beyond who is just speaking the loudest. The C2 listener is watching the conversation's power flow.
The power...
Is the official leader of the meeting being interrupted successfully by a junior colleague? If they are, the hierarchy is actually shifting in real time. You need to process that linguistic aggression, that sharp, high-tempo jump in, as well as what they're saying.
So the interruption itself is a piece of data.
It's a critical piece of data.
Oh, yeah.
It often reveals underlying tensions or dissent that the main speaker is trying to suppress or ignore. You learn more from the interruption than from the next 5 minutes of polite discussion.
That's where that social dimension really comes in. The content of the interjection might be brief, but the fact that it happened, and whether it was acknowledged or ignored, tells you volumes about the internal politics of the room.
And that leads us directly to track 3, which is maybe the most subtle of all.
Okay.
Back-channeling.
Back-channeling. You mean those little sounds people make when they're listening?
Precisely. It's that continuous stream of vocal feedback from the non-speaking participants. It's the, yeah, a quick head shake, a sharp intake of breath, or a soft, low, really?
Most learners are probably taught to just tune that stuff out as conversational filler.
And that is a huge mistake. Our sources are clear. C2 proficiency demands you process these cues because they are the silent vote on the main argument.
The silent vote, wow.
Think of it as real-time sentiment analysis. If the audience is giving continuous encouraging back-channel cues like rhythmic, or frequent soft affirmations, you know the speaker is building consensus. The argument is landing.
But if that back-channeling shifts to hesitant sounds or those little skeptical intakes of breath,
then you know the speaker is failing to convince the room. Even if no one has the social capital or the timing to openly challenge them yet, you hear the doubt before it's ever spoken.
So you become a sort of cultural sociologist in real time. You're not just waiting for the next explicit point. You're reading the emotional temperature of the room.
You're listening for the unspoken social contract. And that is what polychronic listening is all about.
So, okay, the application suggestion for training this is crucial. We obviously can't rely on scripted content. We need conversational chaos.
Exactly. The sources recommend high-intensity practice material. Things like panel discussions, parliamentary debates, political talk shows, anything designed to be fast-paced and multi-speaker with high emotional stakes.
So something like BBC Question Time would be a perfect example. Or even some of the more chaotic roundtable sports programs.
Perfect examples, because that kind of content forces your brain to develop that priority filter we discussed. You'll have 4 or 5 experts, often shouting over each other with different regional accents, plus a host who is desperately trying to regain control.
And you're forced to track who's dominant, whose voice carries the technical weight, and whose points are being, verbally assassinated mid-sentence.
If you wait for a clean transition in a show like that, you'll miss the crucial political or factual point that was made during the interruption. You have to operate that 3-track method under intense pressure.
And that ability to make sense of the chaos, to hold the main thread while decoding the back-channel skepticism and noting the interjection from the side, that is the operational definition of C2 proficiency in listening dynamics. Okay, now that we've conquered the chaos of the room, we have to face the chaos of the subject matter. And that brings us to pillar number 12, domain-specific logic and jargon.
Right. This is all about intellectual range.
This is where the C2 listener becomes, as the sources put it, a chameleon.
A chameleon. It's a great metaphor because the requirement shifts from mastering general English, the language of everyday life, to mastering the language of specialized knowledge. C2 proficiency demands the ability to instantly switch between different registers.
And let's be clear, a register isn't just a list of vocabulary.
No, not at all. It's the entire stylistic toolkit. It's the level of formality, the inherent assumptions, the logical structures, even the acceptable grammar, and the pace of delivery that are specific to a certain context.
The proficient listener needs to have this cognitive library with maps for radically different language environments.
And think about the incredible range that's required to navigate English in the modern world. The sources give a few examples that really highlight this massive disparity.
Okay, so for example, on one hand, you need to be able to follow a highly technical documentary on astrophysics.
Right. That register is dense, abstract, and it relies on precise technical terminology words like spectroscopy, event horizon, or gravitational lensing. The logic is deductive, scientific, and it often requires these long, complex sentences to convey detailed physical relationships.
Okay, now compare that mental framework to the second example. Understanding the rapid, procedure-heavy pace of a legal drama or a courtroom transcript.
Completely different world. Here, the register is argumentative. It's constrained by centuries of specific precedent. You're dealing with terms like voir dire, mandamus, stipulation.
Things most native speakers wouldn't even know.
Exactly. The logic is procedural. The speed is often incredibly high, forcing you to rapidly comprehend complex conditional clauses and cross-examination strategies. Your brain has to switch immediately from cosmic scales to case law.
And then there's a third example they give, comprehending a high-level financial report.
Another universe entirely. This involves a whole new vocabulary of acronyms, metrics, economic abstractions. Q4 EBITDA, securitization, debt-to-equity ratios.
The logic is numerical, it's predictive.
And you're often dealing with this dense, abbreviated language that just assumes you have immediate familiarity with global markets.
So a strong B2 speaker might understand the basic plot of a legal drama, but they'd be completely lost in that technical report. The C2 listener has to be able to parachute into any of these registers and follow the argument at a native pace.
Absorbing the logic and the terminology simultaneously. That is the C2 range requirement.
So the big question is, how do you build this library of neural maps without, spending 5 years in law school and another 10 in finance?
Well, the strategy detailed in the sources is fascinating. It's called the specialist deep dive method.
Okay, and this method is, well, it's highly counterintuitive. It says you must pick a topic the listener knows nothing about, even in their native language. I have to push back on that a bit. Why would you intentionally choose something difficult? If I want to learn financial jargon, wouldn't it be easier to start with concepts I already know from my professional life, just translate it into English?
That is the common approach.
Yeah.
But the sources argue it creates a psychological crutch.
A crutch.
Yes. If you choose a topic you already master in your native tongue, say mechanical engineering, your brain constantly defaults back to your native terminology. It's always translating concept A into English word B. You're just reinforcing the translation barrier.
Okay, I see the connection now. This goes back to that flow state problem we're going to talk about.
Exactly. The brilliance of the specialist deep dive is that by choosing a truly novel topic like, say, 18th century French naval history, if you know nothing about it, you force your brain to encode the concept directly in English.
Because there's no existing file in your native language for it to rely on.
There's no fallback. So the training strategy is to spend one entire week, 7 days, listening only to content in that specific brand new field in English. No translation, no side reading in your native language. Total immersion.
And the cognitive goal here is to force the creation of a new, optimized neural map.
Right. Since the brain can't use its established shortcuts, it recognizes the efficiency of just creating a dedicated English pathway for that specific domain. It's like creating a brand new English-only subdirectory in your brain for 18th century French naval history.
So the goal isn't just content mastery. It's about demonstrating the system's processing speed and adaptability when it's faced with novelty. It's like a fitness test for your language processor.
It is pure cognitive flexibility training. By forcing this intensive single-domain immersion, you prove to your brain that English is a completely self-sufficient tool for acquiring knowledge, even for subjects that are completely foreign to you.
And every new map you build makes the next one exponentially easier to create.
Because you've mastered the process of specialized cognitive mapping itself.
So the immediate application is clear. Abandon your comfort zone. Find the most niche, complex subject you can imagine, and use English as your only key to unlocking it for a full week.
That sounds like a fascinating and very rigorous challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've moved from social dynamics to intellectual range. Now we pivot to intellectual maturity with pillar number 13, critical listening and bias detection. The sources are really clear on this. The advanced listener doesn't just receive information, they analyze the packaging.
This is the critical transition point where your language skill merges with high-level psychology and rhetoric. The C2 listener's mandate is not just to understand the facts, but to understand the frame the facts are being presented within.
And crucially, the intent of the person doing the framing.
Absolutely. This means listening intensely for the linguistic tools that are used to mask or soften or manipulate reality. And the most common ones are euphemisms and loaded language.
Euphemisms, they are just everywhere once you start listening for them.
Yeah.
They're the most common tools of institutional bias. They're designed to distance the listener from the unpleasant emotional reality of an event. They're narrative control mechanisms.
Let's analyze some of the examples. The classic one is collateral damage. versus civilian deaths.
Right. Collateral damage sounds almost like an unfortunate but acceptable byproduct of a large, important operation. Civilian deaths forces a direct recognition of the loss of human life. The emotional weight is completely different.
Yeah, let's think about the corporate world. Instead of hearing firing people or mass layoffs,
You hear workforce reduction, or the even colder, right-sizing the organization.
right-sizing is particularly insidious, isn't it? It implies the company was previously wrong-sized, which makes this incredibly painful action sound rational, necessary, and strategic.
Instead of desperate or reactive, another common one is cost optimization.
Instead of the hard truth of budget cuts or eliminating necessary services.
Exactly. The C2 listener instantly registers that cost optimization is just a way to make budget cuts sound like an innovation. The proficient listener decodes that underlying bias immediately.
But this bias detection goes deeper than just euphemisms. It also means listening for what the sources call weasel words.
Weasel words. These are words or phrases designed to sound authoritative without actually providing any verifiable sources.
A prime example would be when a speaker or a journalist says, "study show," or "experts agree."
Right, and the C2 listener immediately has to ask, which studies? What are their methodologies? Who are these experts? The weasel words are designed to shut down critical thought by making a claim sound established and undeniable.
When really it's just an unsupported assertion.
Another classic is sources close to the matter indicate, or it has been suggested that.
This allows the speaker to introduce speculation or potentially damaging information without taking any personal accountability. It's a mechanism for linguistic manipulation and deniability.
So the advanced listener has to have their guard up, constantly questioning the linguistic vehicle that's carrying the information, not just the information itself.
And that leads to the next level of analysis: adjectives and agenda.
Yes. The specific adjectives a speaker chooses are often the most direct window into their subconscious or conscious agenda. They inject opinion and spin into otherwise factual statements.
Let's elaborate on the pairs from the sources. If someone describes a politician's approach as frugal versus cheap, both are about spending less money.
But frugal attributes a positive quality. It suggests sensible stewardship, control, wisdom. Cheap, on the other hand, implies inadequacy, a reluctance to spend, and a negative impact on quality or morale.
So the speaker's choice of a single adjective instantly frames the politician's entire philosophy in either a positive or a negative light.
Exactly. Or consider this pair, describing a technological innovation as groundbreaking versus untested.
The underlying fact is the same. It's new.
But groundbreaking injects excitement and potential. It attributes genius to the inventor. Untested injects immediate skepticism and risk. It suggests potential failure, irresponsibility.
So the C2 listener understands that the objective reality is simply new, and the adjective choice reveals the speaker's hope or their fear regarding that innovation.
Which is why the crucial question that must drive every C2 listener, the one that separates the fluent from the critical analyst, is always, what is the speaker's agenda?
You're decoding for motivation.
You're operating on the assumption that every sophisticated linguistic choice, be a euphemism, a weasel word, or a subtly loaded adjective, is intentional. This ability to detect that subtle manipulation, to separate the fact from the intended feeling, is the true hallmark of intellectual mastery.
We've established that mastery requires dealing with noise and detecting bias. Now let's focus on the final cognitive hurdles, the sheer psychology of deep immersion. Let's tackle pillar number 14 first, mastering the flow state.
This pillar addresses the final, insidious obstacle for even highly advanced learners. And that is the persistent internal translation barrier.
It's that tiny millisecond lag, isn't it? You hear a complex idea or an unfamiliar word, and your brain defaults to this momentary internal monologue. Okay, what's the equivalent in my native language?
And that microtranslation, that little cognitive detour, completely breaks the C2 requirement for high-speed dynamic listening. If you're translating every third concept, you can never keep pace with the chaotic dialogue of polychronic listening.
And you certainly can't be focusing on the speaker's agenda at the same time.
No, the translation process just consumes too much valuable cognitive bandwidth. It's like trying to run an advanced operating system, your C2 English, but forcing it to run through an older, slower virtual machine, which is your native language.
So the goal is to get rid of the virtual machine. The goal is what the sources call conceptual listening.
Conceptual listening, it's a profound cognitive reorganization. Let's use the source example. When you hear a word like unprecedented, The C2 listeners should not be thinking of the German or Spanish or Chinese equivalent. They should feel the concept, the sheer weight of novelty, the historical break, the idea of never before seen.
So it's immediate, it's visceral, and it's direct.
It's the highest form of linguistic processing. The sound pattern is linked directly to the abstract meaning, bypassing that intermediate native language step entirely. This frees up your cognitive resources for critical analysis.
So how do we force the brain to make this fundamental shift? How do you discard the crutch of translation for good?
The prescription for achieving this flow state is, well, it's brutally efficient. You have to dramatically increase the volume of input.
The volume of input.
The sources suggest that active study hours alone are not enough. You have to establish a psychological saturation point. The recommendation is listening to English for at least 2 to 3 hours a day, every single day.
And that includes passive listening.
Yes, even if a significant portion of that is passive English in the background while you clean, cook, or commute. The objective is massive, continuous exposure.
So if the brain is just swimming in English sound and noise for 2 or 3 hours a day, it starts to assume English is the dominant primary environment that it needs for daily survival and communication.
This high-volume immersion is a forcing function. The brain, because it's always seeking optimal efficiency and speed, recognizes the cognitive inefficiency of constantly switching language databases. So it streamlines the process. It reinforces the direct English-to-concept pathway and the internal translation mechanism just to stop it. It atrophies from lack of use.
It's the physiological mechanism behind the flow state. You are effectively upgrading your brain's language processing from a dual-core system to a dedicated high-speed English processor. The language moves out of the academic study area and into the fundamental realm of thought and existence.
And that leads us perfectly into pillar number 15. This is the final, most subtle indication of total mastery, the shadow of the subconscious.
This moves beyond sheer volume and into true cultural understanding.
It really does. This pillar highlights the phenomena of native speakers using half sentences or elliptical speech that just trails off.
Where language becomes so utterly efficient that the words themselves become optional. They're often replaced by context or shared cultural assumptions.
And this relies entirely on native speakers sharing a deep internal cultural script. They operate with so much implicit shared context, shared jokes, shared history, shared idioms, that they don't need to finish every thought.
This is the field of pragmatics, isn't it? The study of how context shapes unspoken meaning.
Exactly. A C2 listener must be proficient in the pragmatics of English, understanding what is implied when something is left out.
Let's revisit the examples from the sources. First, saying, well, you know what they say, and then just leaving the proverb unfinished.
The speaker is signaling that they're invoking common wisdom, but the specific wisdom depends entirely on the context. If the discussion is about patience, the implied finish is obviously, good things come to those who wait.
But if the discussion is about taking chances, the implied finish might be nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Right. A master listener pulls the correct cultural script immediately from their subconscious archive without even thinking about it.
And the second example, if I were you, followed by just a gesture or a concerned look or a shift in body language.
This is even more reliant on pragmatics. The listener has to synthesize the implied advice based on the relationship, the tone, and all the nonverbal cues. If a friend says this with a sharp, worried look while you're discussing your spending habits,
the unspoken conclusion is pretty clear.
It's crystal clear. If I were you, I would stop spending money on that immediately. The proficiency is measured by the speed and accuracy with which you infer that unstated conclusion.
Can you give another example of this unspoken cultural script, maybe in a different context, say a political one?
Certainly. Think about a business negotiation. One side offers a deal, and the other responds by saying, that sounds like putting lipstick on a pig.
They don't need to finish the thought. They don't need to say, the deal is inherently flawed despite your superficial improvements. The listener has to immediately understand the deep-seated cultural script of that idiom,
which signifies a cosmetic fix being applied to a fundamentally bad situation. And that right there signifies peak immersion.
So the master listener can not only finish these sentences in their head without effort, but they can anticipate which idiom or cultural script is about to be invoked, just based on the preceding context.
The conceptual communication overrides the explicit linguistic input entirely. It's powerful because it suggests you're not just operating within the language's grammar, but you have full access to its cultural and historical memory. You are truly thinking, feeling, and predicting in the language.
The words are only the confirmation of a shared understanding that you already possess subconsciously.
That's the final frontier of listening mastery.
Okay, we've covered 5 immense, sophisticated concepts: polychronic listening, domain switching, bias detection, flow state, and subconscious mastery. Now, let's get practical and apply this theory with the specific, concrete challenges outlined in the source material.
These 2 challenges are designed to force your advanced skills into active application. They're about making sure the theory translates into operational ability.
Let's start with challenge 1, tone analysis. This directly engages the critical listening and bias detection skills from Pillar 13.
For this task, you need to select a long-form investigative report. Go to a sophisticated news outlet, NPR, the New York Times, The Guardian. These reports are ideal because the journalism is highly polished, which means any bias or agenda will be subtle and expertly concealed.
And the task is very specific. You have to write a 100-word summary, not of the facts presented, but strictly of the tone and perspective of the journalist or the narrator.
This forces that cognitive separation we discussed. You have to deliberately disregard the factual data like the budget was cut by 10% and focus entirely on the delivery.
So you're asking, what adjectives were used to describe the people affected? Was the journalist's cadence rushed, implying urgency? Or was it slow and deliberate, implying deep moral gravity?
Did they use specific euphemisms like revenue adjustment instead of loss of profit? The ultimate cognitive payoff here is learning to filter out the emotional framework the journalist wants you to adopt.
The C2 listener has to be able to state, okay, the facts are A, B, and C, but the perspective being promoted here is one of outrage and urgency. This ability to separate content from delivery is the litmus test for critical proficiency.
The tone analysis forces you to track the underlying agenda. You're no longer tracking the narrative, you are tracking the narrator's intent.
Okay, that's a great challenge. Now for challenge 2, rhythmic adjustment.
This one tests the flexibility of your hard-won neural maps. It tests your resistance to relying on comfortable, standard phonetic patterns.
The challenge here is to deliberately confront non-standard dialect.
You need to seek out content. Maybe a local history podcast, a regional documentary, a community radio interview from a geographic area known for a strong, distinct rhythm and accent.
So we're talking about really challenging your ears with material from, say, rural Newfoundland or deep Cockney London, a regional Scottish accent, or a strong American Appalachian dialect.
And the most crucial instruction is non-negotiable.
No subtitles.
Absolutely no subtitles or transcripts. You must force your brain to engage only with the raw sound signal.
If the vast majority of your training has been on that standard, crisp, general American or BBC English, your brain has developed a very specific, rigid set of phonetic expectations.
And non-standard dialects just break those rules immediately. The vowel sounds change, the stress shifts, entire syllables are omitted or swallowed. The initial reaction will be cognitive struggle, a feeling of frustration as your processor struggles to match this new sound input with the language map it expects.
And the goal is to track precisely how long it takes for your brain to have that breakthrough moment, the click.
The moment it clicks. That signifies successful rhythmic adjustment. It means your language processor has recognized the new acoustic pattern, discarded the rigid standard phonetic map, and adapted to the new reality. It proves your language processing is resilient and universally adaptable.
It's not reliant on a single idealized pronunciation model.
Right. Mastering C2 means your language processing is robust enough to handle any sonic variation, no matter how regional or unique. This rhythmic adjustment is a powerful final exercise in intellectual flexibility.
And before we move to our final thought, I think we have to pause and just acknowledge the significance of this level. I mean, mastering all this, polychronic listening, switching complex domains, detecting subtle bias, achieving conceptual flow, and anticipating cultural scripts. That is a monumental cognitive achievement.
It absolutely is. It represents the complete integration of the listener into the full intellectual and social machinery of the English-speaking world. You're no longer merely communicating, you're operating at the level of critical thought.
So, to quickly recap the complex territory we conquered today, we scaled the 5 C2 proficiency pillars. We started with navigating multispeaker dynamics through the art of polychronic listening.
Then we moved to expanding intellectual range with domain switching, using that specialist deep dive method.
After that, achieving critical listening by identifying bias, weasel words, and agenda.
Then realizing the conceptual flow state by increasing input volume to bypass that translation barrier.
And finally, reaching subconscious mastery by leveraging pragmatics and anticipating those cultural scripts.
And what's so evident from analyzing these sources is that true proficiency is fundamentally about critical application and mental agility. The knowledge we've discussed today is only the raw material.
Its value is only realized when you actively apply it to dissect, filter, and analyze real-world communication.
It's the difference between knowing the rules of the language and knowing how to think within the culture and logic of the language.
So as you reflect on this final mastery of listening, we want to leave you with a provocative final thought based on the concepts that immediately follow C2 listening mastery in the advanced source material.
Right. We've dedicated this entire deep dive to the sophisticated reception of language to listening.
But now you should consider how these skills directly inform and enable mastery of language production.
Your expertise in detecting complex language, subtle bias, and highly specialized logic directly informs your ability to engage in two of the most elite forms of output: nuanced advanced writing and the art of sophisticated conversation.
Think about it. Once you can instantly recognize the power of a speaker's deliberately chosen euphemism or loaded adjective in a piece of journalism,
You are perfectly equipped to wield those same tools persuasively and artfully in your own high-level writing.
and once you can navigate the choppy, multi-threaded waters of a chaotic debate using polychronic listening,
You're ready to insert yourself effectively, not merely by making a point, but by knowing exactly when and how to deliver that point for maximum social and intellectual impact.
so your current mastery of reception isn't the end goal. It's actually the foundational skill that enables your next great leap, becoming an elite producer of sophisticated, high-impact language.
That connection is the terrain for you to explore next.
Keep building those neural maps, keep detecting those agendas, and keep listening deeply, critically, and polychronically.
We look forward to seeing where your C2 mastery takes you next.